Welcome to my channel, The Untamed Savior, the secret method that helped the traumatized foal trust humans again. The quiet hours hold secrets. In the heart of the Montana high country, where the wind carried the scent of sage and pine, life was meant to be simple, harsh, but predictable. The land itself was ancient, vast, and unforgiving, demanding respect from anything that dared to stand upon it. Yet it offered profound, silent beauty. This harshness, this grandeur, usually provided solace, grounding those who live within its rhythms, except for the times when life rips the predictability right out of your hands, leaving only the raw, exposed scar tissue of fear to face the wide, indifferent sky. This is where our story truly begins, not in the glory of the open range, where horses run free and unburdened by memory, but in the close, anxious shadow of a half-dark stall. It was here that a trauma was stored, held tight in the small, trembling body of filly we would come to call Echo. Her name was chosen because she was, tragically, nothing more than the hollow sound of what was done to her. Every movement was a flinch. Every moment of rest was tentative, borrowed time before the next inevitable disaster. She lived entirely in the anticipation of the next pain. She had arrived 2 weeks prior, a victim of an abandonment so sudden and brutal. The specific details didn't matter to Clara, and certainly not to the foal. What mattered was the fallout, the deep, crippling internal chaos, the immediate, suffocating certainty that the world was a place of random violence and cruel betrayal. Every shadow was an imminent monster poised to strike. Every sudden shift in air pressure was a hammer blow against her nervous system. She hadn't been touched, not truly, since she was found, a broken vessel of fear delivered into quiet, patient custody of the ranch. The fear was so palpable you could almost taste a metallic tang of adrenaline in the stall air. It was a dense, suffocating silence. Clara was the last hope. She ran the small, independent rehabilitation ranch, a place specifically designed for animals the conventional world had given up on, a haven where broken bodies came to mend, and where, sometimes, broken spirits could find a reason to trust again. But even Clara, who had seen true hardship and who possessed an almost inhuman reserve of patience, felt the unique, freezing weight of Echo's terror. It was a silence louder than any scream, a total, rigid refusal to engage that spoke volumes about the depth of her despair. Watch her closely. At the slightest sound, the distant closing of a truck door, the low scurry of a mouse, the foal would tense. Her muscles would lock up so tightly they seemed incapable of bending, anticipating the impact. Her breath would hitch, hold, and then come out in a sharp, strained release. She wasn't just afraid of something specific, like a whip or a loud voice. She was afraid of everything. Her entire existence was defined by waiting for the inevitable moment the safety would be ripped away. Her nervous system was a frayed wire, constantly humming with the expectation of pain, and it was slowly draining her life force. Most trainers would have protocols. They would start with ropes or slow approach methods, with authoritative, yet careful movements designed to establish dominance and safety at once. They would move forward, demanding a reaction, demanding a response, demanding respect. They would operate on a logical but flawed assumption that the animal needs structure imposed upon it to feel secure. But Clara knew that to demand a connection, to impose any kind of force onto a soul that's fractured, was just another form of violence. The fight-or-flight response was already overwhelmed. There was simply no space left for a demand. To enter the stall with any agenda, even a gentle one, would be to validate the foal's deepest suspicion, that humans only approach with intent to take or control. So, Clara did nothing. She simply leaned against the door jamb, silent, motionless, seemingly indifferent to the creature inside. She observed the dust motes dancing in the shaft of afternoon light. She didn't look at Echo. She waited, letting the seconds become minutes, letting the silence extend, banking on the fact that absolute non-action was a language the trauma hadn't yet taught her to fear. She waited for a moment that might never come. This was the opening of her secret method, the long, agonizing power of standing still. It was a profound act of self-control. The first week was pure, unadulterated tension. It was a battle waged entirely through stillness, a contest of wills defined by who could remain the most neutral. The foal, Echo wouldn't eat unless Clara had been completely out of sight for at least an hour. She wouldn't drink while the human was even in the barn. She would stand stiffly, rationing her resources, preferring dehydration over the vulnerability of dropping her head to the water bucket. Clara understood this perfectly. Eating meant distracting herself, and distracting herself meant missing the exact moment the danger arrived. Clara moved in inches, not feet. Her presence was deliberately mundane, a stone in the corner, unremarkable. Eventually, she moved to a low bucket just inside the door. Her back was to the foal. She would sit there, doing something insignificant like slowly braiding a piece of old rope, her movements predictable and small, never initiating contact or even acknowledgement. The challenge wasn't to teach Echo to obey. The profound challenge was to teach her that the world, in this small, dusty space, no longer required hypervigilance. The goal was to become a fixture in the foal's environment, like the hay rack or the water trough, rather than an active, intentional agent. Every morning, Clara would enter, sit down, and breathe. That was all, for hours of breathing. She paid no attention to the foal. She gave no commands. She made no sudden movements. Her only tool was her own calm, regulated nervous system, a slow, steady anchor dropped into a sea of panic. She was demonstrating, through sheer, tedious repetition, that her presence carried no threat and demanded no response. This was a foundational lie she had to dismantle. The foal's belief that all humans require something from you, usually painful. The fear didn't dissipate. It just found a new rhythm. Echo learned that the woman was predictably boring. She wasn't dangerous, but she wasn't safe either, not yet. She was a statue, a very large, breathing statue whose heart rate remained steady, even as the world around them shifted. The foal was subconsciously monitoring Clara's physiology, waiting for the spike in adrenaline, the tension in the shoulders, the quickness of the breath, the signs of intent that never came. The little shifts began on day 9. Clara introduced a low, constant hum. Not a song, just a steady vibration starting low in her chest. A sound intended not to be heard and analyzed, but be felt as a consistent, non-aggressive vibration. It was a frequency of peace, a steady pulse in the chaos, a subtle, non-verbal cue that the human body near her was in a sustained state of rest. It was a sharing of biorhythm, the deepest form of silent communication available to a horse. A crack, a tiny, seismic shift in the emotional landscape. She ate, not a mouthful, but a few quiet, tentative bites of hay. Then she retreated instantly, ashamed of her momentary lapse in vigilance. But it was a conversation started. The need for nourishment, the primal requirement of survival, had momentarily outweighed the immediate fear. It was a sign that the body's natural instinct to live was starting to override the mind's training to fear. This was the hardest part of the method, non-reaction. Humans are wired to reward effort, to praise positive movement. But Clara knew that any praise, any sudden look, any tilt of the head, would shatter the fragile bubble of tentative security Echo had created. It would be a demand for interaction, a breakage of the silent contract. The slightest indication of an agenda would send Echo straight back into the corner for weeks. 2 weeks. 80 hours of silent, motionless companionship. 80 hours of breathing. Most people had given up, convinced that the foal was willfully resisting, obstinate. They would have called the foal unreachable or too far gone. But Clara understood that trauma creates deep, well-worn grooves in the mind, neural pathways etched by pain. You can't fill them with quick fixes. You have to let them erode naturally, one breath, 1 minute, one motionless hour at a time. The work wasn't measured in progress, but in duration. Then the weather turned. The sky, which had been so gentle, opened up with fury. The air grew heavy, thick with the electric charge of an approaching thunderstorm. The storm was a memory made real. The sudden, terrifying crack of thunder was a confirmation of her deepest terror. The terrifying, unpredictable noise that precedes disaster. She was utterly alone, under attack by the elements, convinced the end had finally come. The progress of 2 weeks was gone in a single, deafening moment, replaced by pure, instinctual panic. This was the breaking point. The moment Clara had to choose between intervention and trust. She didn't move toward the foal. She didn't restrain her, but she let her voice rise, deliberately, slowly, to repeat her quiet melody, louder this time, a steady anchor against chaos. She created an island of predictable sound. She transmitted her will through vibration. Breathe with me. She willed her, sending the intention out into the fearful air. I am steady. You can be steady too. We are here together. The foal was still trembling violently, but slowly her head, which was tucked into her body, lifted slightly, just enough to focus one wide, distressed eye on Clara. For the first time, the fear didn't drive her away from a human. The magnitude of the external threat was so immense, she subconsciously sought the only stable point in the room. In the midst of the terrifying noise, the human's quiet hum became a fixed, non-aggressive reference point, a tiny beacon of predictable calm. She didn't come closer, not yet, but she changed her relationship with the corner. She took a tentative step, then another, still shaking. She stepped out of the shadow and into the neutral ground, her own tiny declaration that she would not be trapped by her own fear. She would face the storm, guided by the quiet rhythm of the woman's humming voice. She chose open vulnerability over contained terror. The storm passed. The danger retreated, shrinking back into the sky. An echo remained in the center of the stall. She hadn't been saved by a human, but she had felt the continuous, unshaken presence of a human who didn't panic. In the mind of a traumatized creature, that is the difference between a threat and a guardian. It is a first step toward recognizing a kinship that might endure. Clara gathers her things and slowly, silently, leaves the stall. The foal watches her go, but does not flinch. End of the day. That night, Echo stood in the middle of the stall, not hiding. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it no longer held a leash. The quiet rebellion had begun. After the storm, the atmosphere changed entirely. The tension hadn't vanished, but the foundation of the relationship had fundamentally shifted. Echo now understood that the woman was not only non-threatening, but she was also a source of strange, inexplicable stability in a world built on chaos. Clara increased her time in the stall. She sat for 4 hours straight, letting her weight settle completely onto the bucket, becoming heavy and permanent. She never sought eye contact. She simply occupied space, breathing. The air had become thicker with quiet expectation, no longer charged with threat, but with the possibility of peace. One morning, Echo began to chew her hay, slowly, rhythmically, less than 3 feet from Clara's back. It was an act of profound vulnerability. Horses can't chew and run at the same time. This was her saying, I trust that you will not harm me in this moment of weakness. It was a gift of relaxation, offered freely. Still, Clara did not reach out. She understood that trust, when built on a foundation of deep fear, is like a sandcastle crafted over weeks. The first sudden wave of human touch, a sudden reward, a grab, a friendly pat, would wash the entire structure away. She had to wait for the foal to make the next move, to own the connection fully. The next tool in her secret method was vocal predictability. She began to sing her simple phrase, always the same, always at the same low volume. A steady rhythm, an unchallenging sound. It became a sonic marker for safety, a quiet mantra of the present moment. The foal takes a step closer, moving her head slowly. Her curiosity is overcoming her caution. She extends her muzzle, taking a tentative sniff of the air near Clara's shoulder, gathering information through scent. The smell of a human is a complex thing to a prey animal. Echo was meticulously cataloging this human scent, unthreatening. She was verifying the physical data with the olfactory data. And then, the first deliberate touch. Not from a human, but from the horse. Echo nudged the sleeve of Clara's jacket with her nose. A light, questioning push, like testing the depth of water with a cautious toe. She waited for the expected recoil, the sharp movement, the sudden tension. Clara barely moves. She keeps breathing. She maintains her song, her eyes fixed on the book in her lap, her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hand remained still. The absence of reward was the greatest reward of all. You are free to interact without consequence. I require nothing in return. The foal, receiving no reactive flinch, repeats the nudge. This time, she rests her chin on Clara's shoulder for a fraction of a second, then pulls away instantly, checking for safety. She was testing the perimeter. Can I initiate? Can I break the rules of distance? This was a revelation. The truth wasn't the commands or the training. The truth was in the absence of force. The greatest kindness wasn't a treat or a hug. It was a quiet refusal to take advantage of her vulnerability. Days pass. Echo is now standing right beside Clara, sometimes dozing lightly, sometimes just watching the barn, a comfortable wait. They became a unit of peace in the stall. The foal would stand the arc of Clara's breath, using her calm as a shield against the noise of the world outside. One evening, Clara stayed late. The barn was dark and cool. She finished her writing and prepared to leave. She stood up, slowly, deliberately, giving the foal ample warning. Now, she would try the next step, prolonged gentle contact, non-focused. She leaned her head against a post, as if simply tired, and let her arm fall naturally, the side of her wrist resting softly against the foal's cheekbone. A completely passive touch, offered without intention. She waited. The foal froze for a moment, waiting for the expected flinch of pain. But there was nothing but the warmth of skin. The foal lets out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, a long, tremulous expiration of breath. It was a release of months of stored tension. The first true, unforced relaxation Echo had allowed herself in a human presence. Clara lets her wrist slide slowly, a feather-light movement, down the foal's neck, resting gently on the base of the mane for a moment, then withdrawing immediately. The touch was temporary. I can touch you gently, and I can take the pressure away. Your safety is my priority. This was a language of safety Echo finally understood. Consent and withdrawal. The foal turns her head, slowly, and presses the side of her muzzle against Clara's chest, taking a deep breath of the human familiar scent, closing her eyes. That night, the invisible walls didn't just crack, they fell. Echo initiated a deep physical connection. Clara slowly, softly, wraps one arm around the foal's neck, letting her rest her chin on the horse's withers. The secret method wasn't a technique. It was a commitment to radical, unyielding empathy, expressed through relentless passivity. She realized in that moment that fear does not need to be fought. It simply needs to be contradicted by an environment of unwavering peace. The foal's trauma wasn't defiance of the human. It was a desperate plea for safety. The road ahead was still long, but the journey had crossed a critical threshold. The foal was no longer defined by her abandonment. She was defined by her choice to reach out. Clara lifts her arm and stands up. The foal watches her leave the stall without alarm. She then walks to the hay, relaxed, with the internal trauma settled. The external training could finally begin. But Clara didn't call it training. She called it shared movement. Every pull of the lead rope was not a command, but an invitation. Her first time out of the stall and into the open air. For a horse, this is freedom. For Echo, it was overwhelming sensory input. But now, she had a compass. Clara's calm body language. A slight noise outside the fence. A neighbor's dog barks once sharply in the distance. Echo's head snaps up instantly, her body tightening like a bowstring. The danger signals were still wired deep. Clara immediately stops walking. She lets the lead rope go slack, dropping it almost entirely, and turns her back to the fence, covering the side of the foal's body. She performed the ultimate act of animal empathy. She made herself a shield. By interposing her own body between the perceived threat and the foal, Clara said, without words, if something dangerous comes, it must pass through me first. The foal slowly lowers her head. She doesn't run. She leans into Clara's hip, taking comfort not just from the presence, but from the deliberate, selfless act of physical sacrifice. She chose to stay. The choice was not made out of training, but out of faith. The healing was no longer about getting the foal to tolerate a human. It was about the foal deciding to need one as a trusted anchor. Weeks pass. The foal is growing stronger, her coat glossier. She is exploring the pasture, but always keeps an eye on Clara, a habitual check-in. Clara introduces another gentle, older mare into the paddock with Echo. The foal approaches the mare with a quiet confidence. She knew how to seek out and respond to a steady presence. Clara is outside the fence, watching them. A visitor, another trainer from a nearby ranch, approaches the fence and speaks loudly. "You still spending all day just sitting there, Clara? I hear you didn't touch that filly for weeks." The best way is to move M. Apply pressure. Make M earn the release. Otherwise, they never respect the boundaries. You gotta be the leader. Clara turns to the trainer. Respect comes when the walls come down, not when they go up. That filly knew plenty about boundaries. They were built of pain. I'm not training her to fear my boundaries. I'm teaching her to trust her own heart and find safety in my presence. Leadership isn't dominance. It's unwavering reliability. The trainer shrugs, dismissive, and walks away. Her secret method wasn't secret at all. It was just a hard, quiet work of letting go of the human agenda, to stop needing the result and to start honoring the process of genuine, internal change. Clara steps into the paddock. Echo immediately walks over to her, not for a command, but simply to stand beside her. The ultimate test was approaching. The day of the checkup. A new human, new sense, new tools. All the triggers for primal terror, reminding her of the cold, impersonal world that had once discarded her. The foal tenses. The familiar anxiety returns, gripping her heart. Clara steps up immediately. She simply places her hand on the base of Echo's neck, the same spot where her wrist had first rested. She just transmitted her calm to the shared touch. A silent biological message. I am here. My heart is steady. You are safe. The vet begins his examination. The foal flinches slightly, but her focus returns instantly to the weight of Clara's hand. She allows the procedure to continue, anchored by the human. The years of pain, the months of terror, they didn't vanish, but they were placed in context. Echo remembered the storm, the corner, and the woman who had stood still. She chose the steady ground. It was a victory measured not in speed or flashiness, but in the profound, quiet choice of one small, beautiful creature to stay in the light. Clara smiles, a genuine, private smile. She gives the foal a gentle rub on the mane, a true reward this time, earned by quiet bravery. And Clara knew without a doubt that this was the only way to heal a soul. You cannot force a flower to bloom by shouting at it. You can only water the soil, ensure the light is gentle, and wait for the sun. 3 months later, Echo is a healthy, vibrant yearling, running gracefully in a large green pasture with the other horses. She never became needy or overly dependent. She would walk over to Clara, stand for a moment of quiet recognition, and then canter back to her friends. A greeting, a check-in, a silent thank you. The true goal of training is not ownership, but releasement, to give a creature the tools to live independently, but the knowledge that they always have a safe port in the storm. Her secret method, spread among the small community of dedicated, quiet trainers. They called it the stillness, a technique based not on the pressure of training, but on the profound, respectful weight of not doing. The real revelation was this. We often look at the animal, see the damage, and assume we must be the powerful force that fixes it. We use pressure, technique, and reward as tools of repair. But the greatest gift we can offer a traumatized soul is not force, but space. Space to breathe, space to inquire, space to fail and be safe, space to finally realize that the greatest danger is gone, and the safest thing in the world is simply being. The heart of the story wasn't the foal's trauma, but the human's choice. Clara chose to speak the quiet language horses understand best, the language of unwavering peace, delivered through stillness and presence. She accepted the slow clock of nature over the fast clock of human ambition, because ultimately, to heal a creature is not to tame its wildness, but to show it that the world is finally, quietly, safe enough to be wild in, safe enough to run, safe enough to rest, safe enough to trust the ground beneath your feet. Never mistake patience for weakness. The deepest trust is earned not in the struggle, but in the long, quiet aftermath of the surrender of human force. If this story of quiet courage touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, for animals and for the long, slow work of human patience.